unifying with Brahman, and the way you do this cycle over and over again, this is samsara. And moksha is when you finally get it right and you get to exit the loop and achieve heaven, achieve reunification with Brahman. And as I was saying before, Brahman is the God. Brahman is the soul of the universe, or the totality of the universe. Everything is unified. Everything is one. There's nothing that's ultimately separate from Brahman or separable from Brahman. Brahman is all and is in all. All is in Brahman, including you. And your soul, your Atman is the word. Your soul is, to put it crassly, a piece of Brahman. A bit of the divine nature resides in you. That's why a lot of times you'll see Hindus bow to each other. They're bowing to the divine in each other. They're bowing to this instantiation of Brahman. You have within you a bit of God. You have a bit of God's nature in you. Again, not all that different from the Imago Dei if you're from a Jewish or Christian background. We're creating the image and likeness of God. It's a very similar idea, although this is much older than either of those traditions, and developed independently. So Atman is your soul, which is a part of Brahman, which has been sent off into the created world, and its goal, its desire, is to return to Brahman and be reunified with the universal soul. And you go through this process, and this process is to perfect the soul, free the soul of all darkness or sin or bad karma, until it can be set free to return to Brahman.
So is Atman your soul, or is it?
Yes. Atman is your soul. Atman is the word. If you wanted to translate Atman in English, you would translate it as soul. And it lives beyond this life. So your body will die and decay. This samsara names the journey of your soul, which is not identical with you. Right? When you die, your body rots, and most likely your memories and all the things that you think make you you, a lot of that goes away. The essence of you is what remains. Your soul is what remains and moves forward and picks up another body and another consciousness and moves on. All right? Which brings us back to karma, because if everything in the universe is an expression of God, then that makes what you do critically important, because you're always interacting with the divine. So Hinduism, at its most fundamental, is deeply concerned with the good of each human person. And here again, we look as outsiders with our Western mindset at something like the caste system. We think, well, that's just evil. People aren't free. That's not how it was meant to work. It was meant to be for the benefit and the good of each person. It was meant to order life so that everyone would be happy and well-adjusted and could achieve moksha and freedom from the suffering of the world. So, if you were born into a lower caste, then that meant you had things to learn about your own nature, about living and being. And so if you were born in a lower caste where you were working, well, the work itself was seen as good for your soul and would move you forward. Yes?
So is your caste any indication of how close you are to
Yes.
achieving moksha?
Yes. Yeah, you have to move up to achieve moksha. Right. That's why it's part of why the priests are the priests, the Brahmins are the Brahmins, because they're closer to the divine. Does that make sense? But if you're there and you behave really poorly, then you can move right back down the ladder. It's no guarantee.
But the moving up is like different lives.
Yes,
right?
it's different lives.
It's not like moving up if I was a middle caste, I moved up a caste.
No. No, the way you move up is you live that life well and do what you're supposed to do, complete your dharma, which I guess is what we should talk about. The way you move up is you complete your dharma. Probably the best way to translate dharma would be responsibility. You have a set of duties, you have a set of responsibilities. Responsibilities to your family, responsibilities to your village, responsibilities to society at large. And these are in part determined by your caste. So if you're born into an artisan caste, then your responsibility, your dharma, is to live that out as well as you can. Right? Is that fair? Am I doing okay? Yeah, good. Thanks. It feels so funny talking about, I always feel trepidatious talking about other religions because this is not, I didn't grow up with this. I mean, I've studied this, I've read it in books, I've talked to people, but, you know, it's...
funny because my family tells me that I'm sick.
They say that you're sick?
I'm sick, like I've been sick as my family's mentioned.
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that. I wait and bring that up to after we cover Islam because you can't really understand Sikhism without understanding Islam, to me. So we'll get there, and I think that's one of the more interesting ones we'll cover, actually. So back to Dharma. So Dharma is your moral responsibility based on your caste system and just also based on being human. So you can think of Dharma as like your moral balance sheet. So it's what's keeping track of, are you meeting your obligations? Are you meeting your duties? Are you doing what you're supposed to do? To the extent that you are, good karma is accruing, and you're moving closer to either the next step on the caste system in your next life, or perhaps to moksha and moving on and being done with life in this bodily existence. If you're not meeting your moral responsibilities, then you might be moving down. So, there are some specific moral responsibilities that everyone has within Hindu thought, and let's talk about those. There's some specific ones to different caste systems, like rulers need to rule well, priests need to do their priestly functions well, scholars need to do good scholarship, unskilled laborers need to work really hard and put in a good day's work every day, all that sort of thing. But across the caste systems, there are these 5 fundamental values that Hinduism teaches. Remember we talked last time about religion as a vehicle for transmitting moral information. These are the core moral truths that Hinduism has been conveying to the people of the Indian subcontinent for 5,000, 6,000 years now. The first is tolerance. Tolerance of other people, tolerance of other ideas, even of other religions, of other religious systems. This is a primary virtue of the Hindu tradition. The idea here is that everyone is on an individual spiritual journey. There's really not such a thing as heresy within Hinduism. Anybody ever, you know what I'm talking about when I say the word heresy? Right? Ever heard 2 Christians argue with each other about which one was right and which one was wrong? You shouldn't get that with 2 Hindus. Because it's your personal journey and it's your personal journey. Each family can have their own mode of God that they pray to and worship because it's different for everyone. And there's a value placed on tolerating that difference. It's really not possible to criticize another person in that respect for what their theology is, because their theology is dependent on their own personal journey. Likewise, you can't know the karmic state of another individual. That's not something you can know either. They might be having a bad time, but it could be because they're receiving bad karma, or it could be because someone's done something evil to them for which they will receive bad karma. It's not the case that even within the caste system that you're supposed to go around judging people. It doesn't work like that. There's also a lot of tolerance for other faiths. I mean, I think you saw, it was one of the things I love about this clip is how he's embracing all 3 religions. That probably only would work in that order, like Hindu to something else. You wouldn't see Christians like, oh, let's go check out Hinduism, or that doesn't work. There's built into the Hindu thought process is the idea that there can be truth in other religions. We can tolerate Christians, we can tolerate Muslims, which is one of the reasons we see, as we will cover the other Eastern religions, they have so much that they get from Hinduism because Hinduism was tolerant of other ideas without seeing them as competing ideas. The second one is honesty. Honesty is essential in all things. To be honest with a person entails recognizing that that person has the nature of God within them, and so you would no more lie to a person than you would lie to God. To lie to someone, to be dishonest, shows disrespect, not only for the person, but for God himself, and then by extension for your own self as well. Self-control is another one. This entails some degree of self-denial, but not just that. Self-control is not necessarily about giving up things like food, sleep, or water. Self-control is about learning to harness your desires and direct them toward personal or collective good. This allows you to better reflect on what your responsibilities are, what your dharma is, and how you will carry that out. Yoga develops within Hindu tradition as an expression of the need for self-control. Control of body, control of mind. Anyone ever do yoga? Right? And what do you control? What are you trying to control in yoga? Everything, right? Your body, your breathing, your mind, the whole bit, right? Your heart rate. If you do it well, you can calm your whole self down. That's a Hindu idea because self-control, in that sense, is what Hinduism is based on. Respect, again, goes along with honesty. It's the respect of the divine within each other. Respect for elders, respect for teachers, critically important. Respect for other people because they are helping you on your own spiritual journey. And the last one is ahimsa. And ahimsa, the translation for that, and I use that word because you will see that word. The English of that would be non-violence. Or do not strike. That hand there is a symbol for ahimsa. No violence. We know about this, and we know about this word in our own culture because of the work of Mahatma Gandhi, who I'll talk about in just a minute. But ahimsa is an old idea within Hinduism. Violence is not appropriate toward other humans because they're bearers of Brahman with their souls. It's also not an appropriate response to other animals because you might not come back as a human. If you're lower down in the process, you might come back as an animal. Animals have souls as well. Anything that has a soul, whatever it is a part of God. So most Hindus are vegetarian, especially practicing ones. Doesn't mean all Indians are vegetarian. As you saw in the clip, the dad wasn't a vegetarian. And you may not have picked up on that, but that's why he was like, this lamb is so good. Because nobody else was eating the meat. He was the only one eating the meat. And he was kind of digging at them because they were holding on to their religious beliefs. But for Hindus, killing an animal to eat it makes another being suffer for one's own benefit or for one's own ends, and treats the animal as only important for human purposes. And this is a serious violation of Hindu belief. Because in Hindu belief, all things are connected. Brahman, God isn't separate. God, like I said, is in all, and all is in God, even the animals. So, even animals deserve our kindness. All sentient beings should be treated with respect. And so our moral duties extend not just to other humans, but to animals as well, and really to all of nature. So, Hinduism doesn't have any animal sacrifice, no blood sacrifices to gods, nothing like that, like we see in Western religions. You won't see any of that. And And more than just nonviolence, it carries with it this idea of kindness. You should be showing kindness, active care for other people's and other creatures' well-being. The reason we know about that, as I said, was because of Gandhi. Ahimsa became a really important modern concept because, like so many other places in the world, the British took over the Indian subcontinent with their colonial expansion. And India was really key to the British Empire. It gave them access to the Eastern world. It gave them access to a lot of raw materials, to a lot of wealth. And the British imposed fairly violent control over India for about 50 years, give or take. And during that period, there were different attempts by the Indian people to free themselves. There were things that the British called terrorist bombings and things like that the Indians called freedom fighters and things like that. They were going through this armed struggle to free themselves of British control. And into this scenario came Mohandas Gandhi, who was educated in London, became a lawyer, and eventually moved back home to India to take up the cause of his people. And Gandhi latched onto this idea of ahimsa, which I said is an ancient idea. And as soon as he began talking about it, any good Hindu would know what he was talking about. But the point Gandhi made was the key to us throwing off the British rule is this, is us living into our faith, is us living into what it means to be Indian, what it means to be Hindu, and us committing ourselves to nonviolence. Now, that might seem counterintuitive, like you're going to go up against people with guns and you're going to commit to nonviolence. But the thing is, it worked. And the reason it worked is he engaged in what he called nonviolent resistance. He refused to fight the British militarily, but he also convinced his people to refuse to do what the British said. So they didn't fight them physically, but they refused to participate in anything the British were doing, as much as he could get them to. And what they came to learn, to put it in short terms for you, is the 50 or 60,000 British troops that were in India with their guns had a hard time controlling millions of people who decided not to participate. So one of the most famous examples was the Salt March. The British had made it so everyone in India had to buy salt from the British government, and there was a tax levied on it. And if you know anything about Indian food, it is spicy. You can't eat bland food. I don't know who eats food with no salt. But if you're Indian, you're definitely not eating food with no salt. That's disgusting. So they couldn't get salt except through the British government. And Gandhi said, you know what, we're not doing that anymore. We're not paying you to oppress us. So he led this march to the sea, because, if you take salt water and put it like in a baking sheet and leave it in the sun, the water evaporates and you have salt left, right? And so he's like, we don't need your salt. We'll just go get our own salt. And the British said, no, you must buy salt from us. It's illegal to go to the sea and get salt. Well, you can't make it illegal for hundreds of thousands of people. You can't enforce it. And so they tried, and there were a couple of massacres where British soldiers just shot and killed dozens and dozens of Indian people. But then word got out, and it made it to the newspaper in London, and the people in London were like, what are you doing? You're killing unarmed people. It's a bad idea to kill unarmed people. It still kind of gets our attention, even today, when armed people kill unarmed people. It seems like something's wrong, right? And so by doing this, Gandhi created a situation with nonviolence where the British were ultimately broken and agreed to leave. And they agreed to leave even though the Indian people had been nonviolent and even kind with them. Gandhi made the statement that they had traveled so far with the British they wanted to part as friends because of this idea of ahimsa, this idea of respect and kindness toward all people, even toward our oppressors. Not long after this, Martin Luther King got wind of this idea, and it became the basis for the civil rights movement. And the nonviolent resistance that we saw in Birmingham and other places in the South were modeled after what Gandhi had led his people to do in India. And we'll talk more about that later on. So, any questions about that so far? Right. I know it's not a full overview of Indian religion or Hindu religion, but that's not the point of this class.